Bonjour. This is 6.4, passé, composé with avoir. So up to this point, you've really been able to speak only in two tenses. The present tense, where you're saying something is happening now, or I like something currently, and you also could do the future, which is the I am going to do something. It's very important to know the past tense, and it's really a lot simpler than people make it out to be. So, let's get started. When we're talking in the past tense in French, we generally use the passé composé. There are different types of past tense, but the passé composé is most often used. Let's just say that. And the one that you're really going to most often use right now. There are three different translations for it. So let's look at a phrase in the past tense, which is, let's see, we have elle a. Looks like she has, doesn't it? Elle a, she has. That's because that's exactly what it is. She has. Elle a étudié. And this looks like the verb to study. So let's look at this. This can be translated, she has studied, or she studied, or she did study. Just keep it simple, just say she studied. But when you try to form it in your mind, you're going to want to think about it a little bit more literally, because this literally means has. She has studied. But usually the best translation is she studied. Now let's go into why it's called passé composé. It's called passé composé because it is composed of two different elements. We have this, which is the present tense. Watch out. It's the present tense of our auxiliary verb, which is kind of just another way to say our helping verb, that should ring some bells from elementary or middle school grammar here. It's our auxiliary verb. And then we have our past participle. Two parts, our auxiliary verb and our past participle. Now, when we are speaking in the past tense, it's weird, but the first verb that we put is our auxiliary verb, which is avoir in the present tense. This is avoir in the present tense. So you won't be able to figure out how to conjugate in the past tense, how to create a sentence in the past tense, if you don't memorize avoir. If you haven't, you need to get on that, because there's no way that you're going to be able to write sentences in the past tense if you don't know avoir. So let's write avoir over here. Et, a, avant, avait, on. Okay. So, what do? How do we make this sentence in the past tense? Actually makes it very easy, because the only verb that you need to conjugate is avoir. Let's start with I studied. J'ai. We have avoir in the present tense. I have. Now we need to add the past participle, which in English is studied. I have studied. So, the first part to form the passé composé, you already know. You learned that since French 1. You know avoir in the present tense. Don't forget that. If you forget that, and you forget that it's actually pretty simple, you're going to confuse yourself so much. So just remember, it's very easy. If you just remember that it's avoir, you already know it, and so no panicking. Don't overthink this. Avoir in the present tense, the past participle. So how do you get your past participles? This is even easier. You don't have to do any conjugating. If it's an ER verb, you take off the ER and instead you add an E with an accent aigu. If it's an IR verb, you take off the IR and instead you put an I, just an I. And if it's an RE verb, you take off the RE and you put a U. So, let's say we have I studied. Let's say I finished. Like I finished my homework. Finir. Let's take off the IR and we have fini. I finished. Literally, I have, present tense, finished. Now it's in the past tense, just like English. I have finished. I have studied. I have, I have listened. Or let's say I waited. I waited. So we have attendre. We'll take off the RE. Attendu. J'ai attendu. I have waited or I waited. I waited is the translation that I want you to lean towards most of the time. Now watch out, there are some irregular past participles. Irregular past participles. Things that do not follow these rules right here. Those, I'm sorry, you just have to memorize. So we have things like avoir. Avoir changes to EU. It's just the way it is here. So I have had. Or I had. J'ai eu. I have had. I have had. I had. We still need to start with the present tense of avoir, even though, yes, the past participle is avoir too. This is probably one of the most confusing sentences because this is avoir here and this is avoir. But that's just because for the passé composé, you need to do avoir, our auxiliary verb, in the present tense, followed by our past participle. And that's just what it happens to be there. Next section, we're going to learn about the passé composé, but we need to use être, and that's with only a short amount of a few verbs. So this one, you need to memorize avoir, you need to memorize this rule, and you need to memorize a relatively short list of irregular past participles that do not follow this rule.